I've always considered myself a bit of a night owl, often finding myself running errands at odd hours. One particular night, I decided to head to Walmart to pick up a few things. It was one of those late night trips where the store was nearly empty and the atmosphere was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights cast a sterile glow over the aisles, and the only sound was the faint hum of the ventilation system. It felt like I was the only person in the entire store. As I wandered through the aisles, grabbing what I needed, I noticed an older woman standing at the end of one of the aisles. She was tall and slender, with long disheveled gray hair that hung loosely around her face. Her clothes were worn and faded, giving her an almost ghastly appearance. She was staring directly at me, her eyes unblinking, as if she was trying to figure out who I was or what I was doing there. The intensity of her gaze sent a shiver down my spine, but I tried to shrug it off, convincing myself that she was probably just lost in thought. I turned down another aisle, hoping to avoid her, but as I rounded the corner, there she was again, standing at the far end, still staring. This time her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. It was as if she was muttering something to herself, or perhaps trying to communicate with me, but the distance between us made it impossible to hear what she was saying. I quickly grabbed the last few items on my list and headed toward the checkout, eager to leave the store. As I approached the self-checkout kiosks, I glanced over my shoulder and saw the woman standing a few feet away, still staring at me. Her presence was unsettling, to say the least, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I hurriedly scanned my items and paid, keeping an eye on her the entire time. She didn't move, just stood there watching me with those cold, empty eyes. I grabbed my bags and practically sprinted out of the store, my heart pounding in my chest. As I stepped into the parking lot, I glanced back at the entrance and saw the woman standing just inside the sliding doors, still watching me. The automatic doors began to close, but she didn't move, her face slowly disappearing behind the glass. I quickly got into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked at my rearview mirror and saw the woman standing in the middle of the parking lot, directly in the path I had just driven. She was motionless, her eyes still fixed on me, even as I sped away. The entire drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I glanced in the mirror, I half expected to see her sitting in the back seat, those unblinking eyes staring at me. By the time I reached my house, I was a nervous wreck. I rushed inside, double-checked all the locks, and tried to calm myself down. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that woman. Her face haunted my dreams, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, as if expecting her to appear out of nowhere. It was only a few days later when I decided to go back to Walmart, partly to see if she was there again, but mostly to convince myself that it had all been in my head. When I arrived at the store, everything seemed normal. The bright lights, the bustling aisles, and the familiar sound of cash registers put me at ease. I walked around for a bit, half expecting to see the woman again, but she was nowhere to be found. Just as I was about to leave, I overheard a conversation between two employees near the entrance. They were talking about a woman who had been banned from the store for harassing customers. According to them, she was known for following people around the store, muttering to herself, and staring at them with a creepy intensity. They said she had been escorted out by security multiple times, but she always found a way back in. The description they gave matched the woman I had seen perfectly. I left the store feeling uneasy, knowing that my experience hadn't been just a figment of my imagination. The thought that she was still out there, possibly following someone else around the store at that very moment, sent a chill down my spine. I never went back to that Walmart again, and to this day, I still get nervous whenever I see someone who even remotely resembles that woman. When I was in my early 20s, I worked the night shift at a Walmart in a small town. The job was simple enough, stocking shelves, helping the few late-night customers that wandered in, and generally keeping the store in order until the morning crew arrived. The store was usually quiet during those hours, and I often found myself alone in the aisles, my footsteps echoing off the linoleum floors. One night, I was working in the electronics section, restocking some items, when I noticed a man standing at the end of the aisle. He was tall and had a scruffy appearance, with unkempt hair and a disheveled coat that looked like it had seen better days. He was staring at the shelves with an intensity that struck me as odd, but I brushed it off, thinking he was just browsing. I continued with my work, but every time I glanced up, he was still there, staring at the same spot on the shelf. It was as if he was fixated on something, but I couldn't figure out what. After a few minutes, I decided to approach him, hoping to offer assistance and maybe get him to move along so I could finish my task. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, trying to sound as friendly as possible. The man didn't respond at first. He just kept staring at the shelf, his eyes locked on whatever it was that had caught his attention. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned his head slowly to look at me. His eyes were hollow, almost lifeless, and his face was devoid of any emotion. "I'm just looking," he said in a low, raspy voice that sent a shiver down my spine. There was something about the way he said it that made me uneasy, but I forced a smile and nodded, backing away slightly. "All right, let me know if you need any help," I said before returning to my work. As I stopped the shelves, I could feel his eyes on me, even though I was trying my best to ignore him. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my heart began to race. There was something off about this man, something that set off alarm bells in my head. After a few more minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to look at him again, but he was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking he had finally left, and continued with my work. But then I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper coming from behind me. I spun around, expecting to see the man standing there, but there was no one. The aisle was empty, and the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I was about to chalk it up to my imagination when I heard the whisper again, this time coming from the next aisle over. I slowly made my way to the end of the aisle and peeked around the corner. The man was there, standing in the center of the next aisle, his back to me. He was muttering something under his breath, but I couldn't make out the words. His shoulders were hunched, and he was swaying slightly from side to side, as if in a trance. I watched him for a moment, trying to decide what to do. Something about the way he was acting terrified me, but I couldn't just leave him there. I took a deep breath and stepped into the aisle. "Sir, is everything all right?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't respond. Instead, he stopped muttering and slowly turned around to face me. His eyes were wide, almost manic, and there was a strange, twisted smile on his face. He took a step toward me, and I instinctively backed away. "I'm just looking," he repeated, his voice now a low growl. I didn't know what to say or do. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I wanted to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the floor. Before I could react, the man lunged at me, his hands reaching out as if to grab me. I screamed and bolted down the aisle, my legs finally kicking into gear. I didn't stop running until I reached the front of the store, where a couple of my coworkers were standing by the registers. I frantically told them what had happened, and one of them immediately called security. They searched the store, but the man was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The police were called, and I gave them a description of the man, but they didn't seem hopeful. They told me that sometimes people just wander in off the street, especially late at night, and that the man was probably long gone by now. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see the man standing there, with that twisted smile on his face. I was jumpy and paranoid, convinced that he was still in the store watching me. I quit that job a few weeks later. The experience had shaken me so badly that I couldn't bring myself to work the night shift anymore. To this day, I still get anxious whenever I'm in a Walmart, especially if it's late at night. I'll never forget the look in that man's eyes or the sound of his voice as he whispered those chilling words, "I'm just looking." It was a typical Saturday afternoon, and I decided to make a quick trip to Walmart to pick up some groceries. The store was busy, as it usually was on the weekends, with people bustling about, filling their carts with everything from food to household items. I grabbed a cart and started making my way through the aisles, mentally checking off items on my shopping list. As I turned into the produce section, I noticed a man standing near the bananas, watching me intently. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His clothes were dirty and disheveled, and he looked like he hadn't showered in days. There was something about him that made me uneasy, but I tried to ignore it and continue with my shopping. I moved on to the next aisle, but as I was examining a box of cereal, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around, and there he was, standing just a few feet away, still watching me. His eyes were dark and intense, and his expression was unreadable. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't answer. He just kept staring at me, his eyes boring into mine. I felt a wave of discomfort wash over me, and I quickly turned back to my cart, hoping he would take the hint and leave me alone. But he didn't. As I moved through the store, he followed me, keeping a short distance between us but never letting me out of his sight. No matter which aisle I turned into, he was always there, lurking in the background, watching me with that unsettling gaze. By the time I reached the checkout line, my nerves were shot. I could feel my heart racing, and my hands were shaking as I placed my items on the conveyor belt. The cashier scanned my groceries, oblivious to the man standing just a few feet away, still watching me with those piercing eyes. I paid for my items and hurried out of the store, glancing over my shoulder to see if he was following me. Sure enough, he was. He had abandoned his cart and was now trailing me through the parking lot, his footsteps echoing off the pavement. Panic set in as I realized I was alone in the parking lot, with no one around to help me. I fumbled with my keys, my hands trembling as I tried to unlock my car. The man was getting closer, his pace quickening as he closed the distance between us. Finally, I managed to unlock the door and quickly got inside, locking it behind me. I started the engine and looked up just in time to see the man standing right next to my window, his face inches from the glass. He was grinning, a sinister smile that sent a chill down my spine. I floored the gas pedal and sped out of the parking lot, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the man standing in the middle of the parking lot, still grinning as he watched me drive away. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I looked out the window, I half expected to see him standing there, waiting for me. That night, I barely slept, my mind replaying the events of the day over and over again. The next morning, I went back to Walmart, this time with a friend, to report the incident to the manager. They reviewed the security footage and confirmed that the man had followed me through the store and into the parking lot, but they couldn't identify him. He hadn't made any purchases, and there was no record of him entering or leaving the store. The police were called, but without any identifying information, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to be cautious and to call them if I ever saw the man again. For weeks after the incident, I was paranoid. Every time I went to Walmart, I couldn't help but look over my shoulder, scanning the aisles for any sign of the man. I never saw him again, but the fear of that encounter stayed with me. Even now, years later, I still get anxious whenever I'm in a parking lot, especially if it's late at night. The memory of that man's grin, his eyes boring into mine, is something I'll never forget. It's a reminder that danger can lurk in even the most mundane places, and that sometimes a simple trip to the store can turn into a nightmare. Love creepy stories? Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one. Our email is in the description. Please send in your horror stories.